Mr. Atkinson, you'll be able to take care of that?
Certainly.
But I mean, that will be after lunch.
After
though.
lunch? Yeah,
after
we won't
lunch.
get to
We're
that
not.
until after
I don't think Senator Watt's proposing to finish with aviation. In
I'm sure my office is watching and can get in touch with CASA and their services. Thanks,
Very good.
guys.
Okay, thanks. We got everyone we need for this division. I just want to spend a bit of time going through this department's involvement in the government's tourism and aviation recovery package. Just to begin with, could you just explain to me what role your department has had in that package?
Do you want to kick off, Ms. Daisy?
Christine Dacey, Deputy Secretary Transport Group.
Long time no see.
Hi, Senator.
Week before last.
We have been working with colleagues across government on a range of aspects that subsequently formed up into the announcement of the 11th of March. Obviously, our primary focus was on the aviation elements, and you would have seen in the announcement there were a number of existing programs that were extended. There were a couple of new initiatives, and then there was one of the new initiatives which had a particular tourism focus, which is the Tourism Aviation Network Support Measure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and are you able to provide, my understanding is that the overall package has been costed at about $1.2 billion.
That's correct.
Are you able to provide a breakdown of that $1.2 billion by program for us?
Yes, Senator. Just with the caveat that there are two elements, and they are both aviation elements, that are not for publication because we're in the middle of commercial negotiations. And that has been consistent all the way through. Whenever we've announced extensions to like the DANS or the RANS program, we've made them not for publication until we settle the contracts. And then, as you're aware, we publish the maximum contract values either on AusTender for the procurements or the maximum grant value on Grants Connect. So they will follow shortly thereafter, and we are right in the middle of the contract negotiations right now.
Okay.
But as to the 1.2, do you want my best advice for
we
you?
We don't yet have public figures for the DANS and RANS extensions.
And you won't, because we're in the middle of those negotiations.
And but the 1.2 billion, does that include any provision for those two programs?
It does.
Right.
So the numbers that I will read out to you now won't sum to 1.2 because of those two unknown funding envelopes.
Can you just take us through? Is it a long list of
No.
sub-programs? Okay.
No. So the DANS is not for publication. RANS is actually costed at zero on this one because we think we can manage within the existing funding envelope. Mm-hmm. The Air Services fee waiver extension to the end of September is costed at $85 million.
Sorry, that was Air Services?
Fee waiver extension.
Yep.
The new domestic security extension is costed at $90 million.
Yep.
The Aviation Services Accreditation Support Program extension is costed at $52 million.
Yep.
There is an IFAM extension, and so you would need to talk to our Austrade colleagues who administer that program for us.
What's been allocated for that though?
$107 million.
Thanks.
Then the $200 million International Aviation Support Mechanism, and then TANS, which is the not for publication at this point, as we're in the middle of the contract negotiations.
Right. And sorry, as you were going through, I should have asked you the length of time that money has been allocated for each of those sub-programs?
By and large, everything is through till the end of October.
So those figures are expected to be spent by the end of October?
Well, some of them may be exhausted a little earlier. It depends on the nature of each of the programs. Some of them are demand-driven, like the fee waiver. But the intention is that this is a further bridge for the next 6 months while we try and stabilise the domestic aviation sector.
Okay. Any of them expected to go beyond October?
Those are the dates that we have at the moment, Senator.
Okay. By the way...
And can I just be very clear? Actually, I think one or two of them might finish at the end of September. So it's
Which
that
one's
time
that?
of year. I think the IFAM extension is through to the end of September.
Okay. So every one of those programs, except for IFAM, is being funded out of this department?
No. Oh, sorry. My mistake. They're the travel agents to mid-June. There's a travel agents measure in there at 133 million, and that is definitely not being funded out of our department.
Who's funding that one?
I assume it's Austrade.
Right. So I haven't done the maths, but if we add together 133 million, 200 million, 107 million, 52 million, 90 million and 85 million, the balance between that and 1.2 is the amount expected for either DANs or TANs.
Correct.
Right. Which, there's obviously been a lot of interest in the half-price flights. Which sub-program are they being funded out of?
TANs.
Okay, so, and that's still being negotiated with the airlines?
Yes, Senator.
So we don't actually know yet how much will be allocated for that?
No, we have, a funding envelope that we're operating within.
Yep.
But I can't give you that information at the moment.
Okay. There's been quite a lot of confusion about whether that program is capped at 800,000 flights, which was what was originally said, or whether it is actually demand driven, and there's been a number of government figures saying it's demand driven. Can you clear this up for us?
Somewhat unhelpfully, I'll give you the answer is a bit of both. So there's obviously a funding envelope that we're operating within. We are hoping to extract actually a little more than 800,000 seats if we can. It depends on how we go with these contract negotiations. And the demand-driven element speaks to the flexibility that we're seeking to build into the program, so that if we're seeing demand, the whole point of the program is to stimulate activity and stimulate interest in travelling domestically. And so we are working with the airlines so that where we see demand or we see potential untapped demand, that we can shift and flex with inside the program. So it's a bit of both, which I realise is probably not all that helpful.
Okay, but I'll get into this in a bit more detail, but there's obviously been some extra locations added. There's some speculation that there might be further locations added. Whatever happens, where there's no suggestion that there's going to be an extra 100,000 flights provided for, we're working within this cap that might end up being a little bit higher.
The way I describe the 800,000 is a floor.
Is a floor?
As a floor. So there will be a minimum of 800,000 half-price tickets.
Yep.
And depending on how we go in our contract negotiations, that may get a little more.
Yep. Okay, but we're not looking at a significant expansion of that to cater for any additional locations which may yet be added.
I can't foresee hundreds of thousands more, but again, we are still mid-negotiation.
Okay. Was your department involved in the decision as to the locations for these half-price flights?
I guess in a holistic way, we were certainly in regular contact and conversation with our Austrade colleagues, but in terms of holding the data on those locations that were most impacted by the international downturn, that was a matter for Austrade. And
when you say Austrade, does that include Tourism Australia? Or is that, I think of them as separate bodies, but
I don't
because
know.
I thought they were involved in this as well.
Our dealings were with Austrade officials, I have to say.
Right.
I think Tourism Australia is more to the marketing end.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And so the decision as to which locations were chosen was an Austrade decision?
It was a government decision informed by, the advice and inputs from Austrade.
And was your department involved in that advice?
As I described, sort of very holistically.
Right. So what do you understand was the basis for choosing particular locations?
As I just described to you, I think the data was driven and the decisions were driven by those regions that were considered to be particularly impacted by the lack of inbound international tourists, which is directly attributable to the public health measures around COVID.
Okay, so the decision as to which locations were chosen was based on data which showed locations that were particularly impacted by the decline in international tourism.
Senator, that's my layman's explanation.
I think it's best if you talk to Australia.
Yes, I think-
We will, but I'm conscious that your department was involved in this as well.
Ms Dacey's is sort of the general take.
That-
of it,
that's
but
right.
There's more detail.
Yeah. And one of the things that has concerned those of us from Queensland is that there's no provision for Queenslanders to obtain half-price flights to fly anywhere in Queensland, even though they may wish to go to Cairns or now Townsville. What's the reason for that?
I think we have been providing support for intrastate flights through the RANs and DANs programs for over a year now, Senator. The data that we're getting out of those programs shows that some of those intrastate flights, I understand that Brisbane to Cairns was the most heavily trafficked flight sector in Australia for many, many months last year. So this program's intention is to stimulate activity and demand, and so the assessment was made that there was no stimulation needed for that particular intrastate flight. More broadly, I think we just took the view that this program was designed to achieve a number of objectives, and one of them was to get the confidence of the travelling public restored in terms of being able to cross state borders.
Mm-hmm. And so the methodology that was used on this occasion, we talked briefly before about another program that I realise your department is not responsible for, the Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund. That's also an Austrade fund.
Yes.
Is the methodology being used for those two programs, the half-price flights and the Recovery for Regional Tourism Fund, the same, or are they different?
You'd have to ask them.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're both separate.
Yeah, okay. But it does sound like this one is more focused on destinations that rely on international tourism,
That's
which may not be
In
the
the
case for the
broad.
Regional Recovery Fund. And there's obviously been quite a degree of confusion about which locations were included and which ones weren't. I'm not sure if you've seen, I've got copies, I'm not sure if you've seen, but there was a report in the Hobart Mercury on, let me pull up the date, the 12th of March, which said that Hobart was originally part of the federal government's list of destinations chosen for this half-price tickets deal, but was dropped prior to the announcement. And my understanding is that's also the case for three other destinations, being Darwin, Adelaide and Townsville. Were those four locations in the original list that your department signed off on or was involved in?
Senator, I can't speak to that. I know that, to the best of my knowledge, I think there have been 2 additions since the initial announcement, but I could not talk to what was in or out. I'm not privy to those discussions.
Was anyone from this department involved in that?
No, Senator.
Did your department ever sign off in colloquial terms on a list of approved destinations?
Regions? No?
Well, regions. I suppose. I mean, there was a list including Broome,
Yep,
Great Ocean Road, which I presume means Avalon,
correct.
Kangaroo Island. There was a list of, I think, about 9 or 10.
Yeah,
Was your department involved in the decision, or what involvement did you have in settling that?
No.
This was Austrade.
Yeah, these were all matters that were part of the whole decision making, and as I described to you before, we certainly had awareness because we were preparing ourselves to start the conversations with the airlines, but we weren't signing off on them.
Can you enlighten us at all as to why 4 destinations were on the original list? And I've got a copy of that here. It was tweeted by someone in the Tasmanian tourism industry, Shannon Wells. You might know that person, Senator Dunham.
I certainly do.
And it included Adelaide, Darwin, Hobart and Townsville. But when the government announced which locations were going to be able to make use of these half-price fares. Those locations were not included.
I can't.
You don't know anything about that?
No, can't
How
comment.
about you, Minister? You're a proud Tasmanian.
Very
Why was
proud.
Hobart
Thank
left
you
off
for
the list?
acknowledging that. Well, as I think many have said, the original list announced on the Thursday, was always said to be an initial list, and many have advocated for inclusions of other destinations, and they've since been included.
I'm going before that though. The original list, which is the one that Shannon Wells tweeted, did include Hobart, and it did include Adelaide, Darwin and Townsville as well. So why were they left off when the government actually made its announcement?
Sorry,
I'm not familiar with that
Senator,
list.
Yeah, what's that? I don't know that list.
I've not
Well,
seen the
I'm happy
article.
to, I've got copies to table.
Sorry,
Might be.
Senator, these questions are really, the destinations are really a matter for Australia.
Very happy to ask them later in the week as well, but given your department's involved, we're eager to find out what we can from you as well. And there's been a lot of criticism from state governments, from mayors in Hobart, Dubbo, Wagga Wagga, Mildura, Albury, probably others, that they've been left off. Are there any discussions underway that you're aware of to consider expanding the list of locations? Ms Dacey?
I can only go to the statements of various ministers in the media that it's an initial list, so I'm certainly not privy to them.
But you haven't been asked to provide advice or work with Austrade on additional locations?
No, we're busy getting these locations up and running.
Okay, so at this point I know there's been a range of comments by ministers saying it's an initial list, but at this point in time, it's not likely that there'll be other locations added, or there's no work happening on that at least.
I can't speak to what work's going on in other departments. I can only speak to the work my people are doing.
But you'd have to fund it, so you'd like to know about it, wouldn't you?
If the government asked us to do additional destinations, we would.
And they would have to be funded from within the existing envelope, which is around about 800,000 flights.
Unless they chose at the same time to put more money.
That's right.
Yep. I'm not sure if you saw it, but there's a report in today's Sydney Morning Herald, which again I've got copies of and can be tabled, that describes Nationals MPs as being on a collision course with federal ministers over the proposal to extend a version of JobKeeper to the aviation sector. Are you aware of any reconsideration of this program in light of this blow-up by Nationals MPs?
Senator,
Are you asking us to comment on the media article?
It's about JobKeeper.
Pat Monahan wouldn't lie, would he?
The question is to the department, and you obviously, I would expect that they won't be able to provide you with an answer on an opinion. So do you want to come up with a question you can ask them?
So, to take a step back, the half-price tickets part of the package, that which stakeholders sought support in that form?
Senator, I think there's a broader set of issues at play here because for many months, many sectors have asked government for ongoing support. Certainly the aviation sector's been no different in that regard. And the government was minded to consider ways to further stimulate consumer confidence in travel more generally. And so through, policy development work in the usual fashion, we came up with a range of options for government's consideration.
So presumably the airlines asked government to think about funding half-price tickets, but did any other stakeholders beyond the airlines ask for support in that form?
So next, can I just go back to the economic principles of this? It's a stimulus for activity. If we have activity of more people flying, more people travelling, people land at a destination, they take transport at a destination, they presumably have dinner and meals, they have to book somewhere.
I understand the theory. I've heard many ministers
it's a
recite it.
mechanism
My question is simply which stakeholders sought this kind of support as opposed to other types of support. So we know the airlines sought it because it's pretty good for them. Did other stakeholders support this kind of support?
A lot of the subsidy will flow through, but
The subsidy actually does not particularly, the half price element flows through to the individual
consumers.
travelling. The airline does not pocket anything from that. Let's just say they were going to charge $100 for a ticket. They are now going to charge $50 for a ticket. So you, for example, buy a $50 ticket and the Commonwealth makes up that other $50. So the airline is actually no better off. Where it's better off is that it's generating flying.
Sure, and they're getting airfares bought that they might otherwise not. I mean, that's the entire
Correct.
point of the
that's
program.
travelling public.
That's
who
right.
weren't- And that
So-
flows through to everyone in
Sure.
equal proportion.
So
right?
I know we've got to wrap up for lunch, so can I just confirm, were there any stakeholders, aside from the airlines, who asked for support to be provided in the form of half price or discounted fares?
We'd have to check.
Not to the best of my knowledge, but I will take it on
I'm
notice.
just not sure about the airports.
I don't know.
The airports?
Yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
I don't know.
Do you want to?
The one thing I can tell you is that everybody wanted additional activity, they wanted additional people travelling, and they wanted additional funding injected in as a stimulus.
Senator Watt, would you be happy if
Happy
we're
to
coming
resume.
back to
Yep.
aviation, aren't we? And Senator Patrick will resume with aviation. And
Yep.
I did sit through several days of COVID impacted aviation and heard the unions ask for additional activity several times. So I think that there was lots of people keen to see people,
discounted airfares, but
not specifically that. I
That's
think
my
that they were, looking for more activity. So that can only be a good thing. Thank you all. We're going to collapse for lunch and we're going to be back in an hour. Thank you, Hannah.
Senator Watt, did you have an answer on...
Leppington. We do not require the Leppington Triangle people to stick around. I did get a bit of information about that extra information that we're looking for in terms of the dates and dollars for land parcels.
For the land parcels, yeah.
Perhaps you and I can talk about
Yeah,
that
yeah.
offline and I confirm what we're after.
Yep, that's fine.
Thanks.